30 years of service does not make you indispensable, Wallace. It just makes you expensive. Julian Vance said those words without raising his voice, and that flat, cold tone made them feel even worse. He slid a thick, white termination packet across the conference table, leaning back in his leather chair as if he had just approved a routine software upgrade. Instead of ending the career I had spent nearly half my life building, I stared at the packet, then looked up to meet his eyes. My name is Wallace Thorne. I was 55 years old, the principal software architect at Zenith Core Solutions, and until that Thursday, I had been the longest-serving technical leader in the entire company. 12 minutes later, I was not even an employee. If you have ever had a boss mistake your quiet loyalty for weakness, you will understand why I did not argue, raise my voice, or shed a single tear in that room. I was too busy realizing that they had no idea what they had just done. Julian folded his hands over his expensive silk tie, a gesture of mock sympathy that did not reach his cold eyes. We are restructuring engineering leadership, he explained smoothly. Your position is being eliminated. Effective immediately. Effective immediately, I repeated, testing the words on my tongue, feeling the sudden weight of 3 decades crashing down into a single corporate phrase. Beside him, Sylvia Reed from the Human Resources Department kept her eyes fixed on the paperwork in front of her, refusing to look at me. I could tell she was uncomfortable, but she was just another cog in Julian's corporate machine. Then Julian delivered the detail he clearly expected would hurt me the most. Winston Cole will take over all engineering operations, he announced, a slight smirk playing on his lips. He starts tomorrow morning as our new vice president of engineering. Winston was 29 years old. He had been at Zenith Core Solutions for exactly 9 weeks. I had trained senior engineers who had trained other people. Longer than Winston had been active in the technology industry. Winston had barely finished his master's degree when I was already designing enterprise-grade database architectures. Julian kept speaking, his voice smooth and untroubled by the gravity of the situation. Winston believes the current logistics architecture is unnecessarily complicated, he stated, reciting corporate jargon like it was gospel. His view is that the company has been carrying far too much legacy thinking, and we need to move toward a more streamlined, agile approach. Legacy thinking. That was what 30 years of midnight deployments, emergency customer system recoveries, complex database migrations, exhaustive security reviews, and meticulous disaster recovery planning had become. I felt a tight constriction in my chest, a sudden flare of indignation, but I kept my expression blank. Is that Winston's assessment? I asked quietly, keeping my voice perfectly level. Or is it yours, Julian? Julian offered a thin, dismissing smile, brushing off my question as if I were a confused intern. Does it really matter? He replied coldly. That was their first major mistake. They assumed my silence meant I was defeated. Sylvia finally spoke up, her voice rehearsed and tight. Security will collect your company laptop and identification badge as soon as we finish here, Wallace. You will be allowed to collect your personal items from your desk under supervision. I nodded slowly, processing the humiliation they were trying to inflict. Then I asked the only question that actually mattered. Has the legal department reviewed our continuing dependency on the quantum sync engine framework? Julian actually chuckled, shaking his head as if I were clinging to a delusion. Wallace, Zenith Core Solutions owns everything you have ever touched, built, or written while working here. We own the framework, we own the code base, we own your legacy. I stared at him for a second, letting the silence stretch, allowing his arrogance to fill the room. Are you certain about that? I asked softly. His smile vanished, replaced by a flash of annoyance. Yes, completely. There were 6 separate documents inside the termination packet. I read through every single page carefully, taking my time, savoring the final moments of my employment. The third document was a much broader intellectual property release. It stated that I recognized Zenith Core Solutions as the sole owner of all technical frameworks, libraries, tools, and supporting software assets associated with its logistics products. I placed my pen down on the table, feeling a cold resolve settle over me. I'm not signing this document. Sylvia looked up quickly, her eyes widening in surprise. Julian's jaw tightened and he leaned forward, the mask of corporate polite slipping. Why not? Because it is not legally accurate, I replied calmly. He gave a short, irritated laugh, waving a dismissive hand. "Have your attorney waste time reviewing it if you want," he sneered. "I plan to do exactly that," I replied. That was the first moment he looked annoyed, but he was not worried. Not yet. 20 minutes later, I walked through the busy engineering floor, carrying a single cardboard box containing my personal belongings. The software engineers who had called me at midnight for help over the years suddenly became very interested in their computer monitors, avoiding my gaze like I was contagious. One junior developer near the elevators opened his mouth as if he wanted to say something, but he stopped when he saw Sylvia standing right behind me. Another senior developer, a man I had mentored for 5 years, gave me the smallest, almost imperceptible nod. I did not blame them. Fear has a way of making good people quiet when they see a veteran cast out. The walk to my car felt surreal, the evening air crisp and biting. I drove home in complete silence, the radio off, my mind racing through 30 years of memories. I thought about the early days, the late nights, the impossible deadlines we had met. And then I thought about the quantum sync engine. It was the beating heart of their $9 million logistics platform. And they had no idea that they didn't own a single line of its core architecture. At home, I placed the termination packet on my kitchen table, the white envelope against the worn wood. My son Wyatt was out at his university library, preparing for his final examinations, so the house was silent. The quiet was a contrast to the hum of the server rooms and the energy of the engineering floor I had inhabited for the past 30 years. I made a cup of chamomile tea that I never drank, letting it grow cold as I stared out the window into the darkening evening. Then I walked into my home office, unlocked the bottom drawer of my filing cabinet, and pulled out an old, faded blue folder I had not needed to open in years. Inside was the original commercial licensing agreement for the quantum sync engine framework. I unfolded the crisp, yellowing pages and read the renewal clause twice to be certain. Then I checked the calendar date on my computer monitor. The commercial license, the invisible thread holding their entire $9 million empire together, expired at precisely midnight. Zenith Core Solutions had not always been a cold, unfeeling corporate machine run by executives in expensive suits. When I first joined 30 years earlier, it was a tiny crew of 15 passionate people working out of a drafty converted warehouse on the edge of the industrial district. We had cheap folding tables that wobbled when you typed, noisy cooling fans that barely kept the servers from overheating, and a main server room that sounded like a commercial jet engine warming up on a runway. I was 25 years old back then, and my life was a complicated mess. Getting a stable, reliable income mattered far more to me than corporate prestige, stock options, or high-flying titles. During the freezing winter months, the warehouse heating system would fail entirely, and the original founder would share his homemade sandwiches with me, while we huddled around a single, struggling space heater. I would bring my old laptop to the office, wrap myself in a heavy wool blanket, and code late into the night, fueled by cheap coffee and sheer determination. Zenith Core Solutions desperately needed a senior systems architect, someone who could build a robust foundation capable of handling data loads, but they could not afford to hire one on a full-time, permanent basis. So, I agreed to join them as an independent technical consultant. What almost nobody at the company remembered by the time Julian fired me was that I did not arrive at Zenith Core Solutions empty-handed. Before joining them, I had spent 5 years building a highly specialized, robust software framework through my own tiny company, Thorn Logic Studio. I called that framework the Quantum Sync Engine. Customers never saw its interface, and the slick salespeople never mentioned it during their polished product demonstrations. But it solved an ugly problem. It seamlessly synchronized complex transaction data when old warehouse scanners, freight routing systems, inventory databases, customer application programming interfaces, and backup cloud servers all spoke different, conflicting technical languages. As the company expanded into a corporate behemoth, my responsibilities grew increasingly heavier. I missed my son Wyatt's 12th birthday dinner because a critical system migration failed catastrophically at a major freight depot in Texas, forcing me to spend the entire night debugging complex database scripts in a freezing warehouse. I spent countless hours on tense support calls in a hospital parking garage, while my elderly mother was undergoing serious medical tests inside, sitting in my car with the heater running, while listening to frantic operations managers screaming about lost revenue. I spent one entire Thanksgiving weekend rebuilding a broken system integration from scratch because a major retail client could not process their overnight inventory updates. Whenever the annual promotion cycles came around, however, the polished corporate answers remained exactly the same, delivered with practiced smiles. You are far too critical where you are right now, Wallace. We cannot afford to move you out of the core architecture group. Next year, once we stabilize the engineering team, we will seriously look at moving you into executive leadership. I heard some variation of that empty promise year after year. Meanwhile, I trained junior managers who quickly climbed the corporate ladder far above me, and I tirelessly explained complex systems to executives who earned annual performance bonuses based entirely on the stability of the architecture I had built and maintained. Then Julian Vance became the chief executive officer 10 years ago, and the company culture shifted dramatically, becoming unrecognizable. Julian preferred polished presentations, colorful slideshows, and buzzwords over difficult technical questions. He demanded simple, convenient answers, even when the underlying enterprise systems were complex and delicate. Under his aggressive leadership, my daily foundational work became far less visible to the board, while my actual operational responsibilities grew significantly heavier and more stressful. My salary fell far behind the current market rate, and new, arrogant executives arrived with fancy titles I had been repeatedly told were unavailable. I kept foolishly, stubbornly believing that my technical performance and deep loyalty would eventually correct the corporate imbalance. 27 missed calls. The bright screen illuminated the dark bedroom, casting a harsh glow. Zenith Core Solutions had finally read the legal part Julian said did not matter. The first frantic voicemail on my phone was from Winston Cole, and his voice sounded nothing like the arrogant, confident executive he had pretended to be during my termination meeting. Wallace, something is wrong with our main package repository. We are missing critical core code files, and our automated systems are catastrophically failing to compile. The entire logistics platform is down. Call me back immediately. The second angry voicemail was from Julian himself, followed by a tense, trembling message from Sylvia in Human Resources. Then 4 other senior software engineers begging for help, and finally Winston once more, his voice cracking with sheer panic. By 4 in the morning, I had 27 missed calls and 14 urgent, capitalized emails waiting in my personal inbox. I sat calmly at my kitchen table with the faded blue folder open beside me, sipping a fresh cup of coffee, listening to every single voicemail in chronological order before I made any attempt to contact anyone. What the executives at Zenith Core Solutions had just discovered was simple, elegant, and devastating. Nothing had been deleted or illegally corrupted, and I had not touched a single company server or network switch. The Quantum Sync engine was the foundational framework beneath Zenith Core Solutions' entire enterprise logistics platform, a platform which their auditors recently valued at $9 million. Customers never saw the hidden framework, but their warehouse scanners, cargo transit updates, complex inventory records, and external application programming interfaces all depended entirely on it to communicate with the rest of the sprawling application. Zenith Core Solutions legally owned the customer-facing software, the colorful dashboards, and the user interfaces, but they did not own the underlying Quantum Sync engine code. 30 years earlier, the company's own highly paid lawyers had written that crucial distinction into the original licensing agreement. Zenith Core Solutions was only authorized to use the framework under an annual commercial license issued by ThornLogic Studio, my personal limited liability company. The ironclad contract and unequivocally detailed what would happen if that license ever expired or was terminated. Existing customer installations would continue to run for a very short, restrictive transition period, but the company would immediately and permanently lose access to the private repository, the source code updates, and the secure authentication keys required to compile any new builds or deploy any patches. The timing of my firing was almost comical in its justice. The annual renewal date for the quantum sync engine license happened to fall on the exact same Thursday night. Julian terminated my employment. Normally, the corporate accounting department processed the annual invoice associated with Thorn Logic Studio well before the expiration deadline, treating it as a standard vendor payment. But when the Human Resources Department processed my aggressive termination, Sylvia had immediately deactivated my internal employee status and, crucially, canceled all pending vendor profiles connected to my name to lock me out of the system. Someone in corporate accounting had treated my limited liability company like a standard employee expense account. So the automated renewal transaction was and blocked. 12 years prior, outside legal counsel had warned the executive team that they must either purchase the quantum sync engine outright for a substantial sum or maintain the commercial licensing agreement without fail. Leadership chose the cheaper, easier licensing path because I was always there, working in the background to maintain the framework and ensure everything ran smoothly. They treated my continuous presence as a permanent, free resource, a utility they ignored. I had warned them multiple times. When we updated our disaster recovery procedures 3 years ago, I included a complete, detailed licensing review. When we migrated our package managers last year, I specifically asked the legal department to confirm the framework's ownership status. My detailed emails were politely received, filed away, and promptly ignored by executives who were too busy chasing their next quarter's bonus. At 4:15 in the morning, Winston's phone call came through again, the screen flashing brightly in the dim kitchen. I could clearly hear the background noise of the engineering room behind him, a rising murmur of panicked voices, the frantic clattering of keyboards, and the sharp ringing of incoming support calls. This time, I decided to answer the phone. He did not even bother to say hello or offer a greeting. "Where is the missing source code, Wallace? Why has our system access been revoked?" I looked down at the physical contract resting on my wooden table, feeling a deep sense of peace. "There is no missing source code, Winston. The code is exactly where it has always been, safely stored in the Thorn Logic Studio private repository." "Then why are our automated build servers throwing authentication errors? Why is the entire logistics system failing to compile?" Winston demanded, his voice bordering on hysteria. "Because your commercial license has officially expired," I explained calmly, my voice steady and measured. I called my intellectual property attorney, Helen Frost, just as the morning sun was fully rising over the city skyline. I had known Helen for 20 years, since the early days when Zenith Core Solutions was small enough that crucial corporate legal decisions were finalized over cheap paper cups of bitter diner coffee. She answered on the second ring, her voice immediately alert and sharp, recognizing the serious tone in my voice. When I explained that I had been abruptly terminated without cause, and that the Quantum Sync Engine commercial license had automatically expired at midnight due to their gross accounting negligence, she immediately instructed me to remain passive and utterly silent. "Do not log into any company system, Wallace," she ordered firmly, her legal instincts taking over. "Do not touch their remote servers. Do not look at their private repositories. Do not download any snippets of code. And do not attempt to write a single line of repair scripts for them, no matter how much they beg or threaten you." I confidently confirmed that I had no intention of doing so. "You are in a strong, virtually legal position," she assured me, the satisfaction evident in her voice. Helen meticulously explained the complex legal landscape that Julian and Winston had blindly stumbled into. The underlying core code of the Quantum Sync Engine framework was legally registered with the United States Copyright Office. Under my personal limited liability company, Thorn Logic Studio, I had established this crucial intellectual property long before ever signing a full-time employment contract with Zenith Core Solutions. Under Title 17, Section 201 of the United States Code, my absolute ownership of that creative work was fully federally protected, and the corporate commercial license agreement they had just allowed to lapse confirmed that legal distinction. In addition, under the strict provisions of the Digital Millennium Copyright Act, any unauthorized corporate attempt to bypass our digital authentication locks or illegally retrieve the package binaries, without a valid paid license, would carry severe, immediate civil and potentially criminal penalties. More importantly, now that my employment had been officially and legally terminated by Julian himself, I had no legal duty, moral obligation, or contractual requirement to provide emergency technical support, troubleshooting, or consulting services to Zenith Core's solutions without a freshly signed, highly compensated contract. "You do not need to actively punish them, Wallace," she noted with a wry chuckle. "You need to stop volunteering your valuable time for free." 20 minutes later, Julian sent me an angry text message rejecting the legal proposal, calling my terms unreasonable and accusing me of corporate sabotage. After 30 years of receiving my expert emergency services for free, the basic concept of actually paying an invoice apparently felt like a personal insult to his ego. Around noon, while I was making a sandwich, my phone rang again, displaying a name that genuinely surprised me. It was Caroline Pierce, the Chief Technology Officer at Nexus Data Systems, our absolute primary corporate competitor. Caroline had contacted me 3 distinct times over the previous 5 years about leaving and joining her elite executive team. But I had foolishly turned her down each time, out of a misplaced sense of loyalty to Zenith Core Solutions. "I heard you are finally available in the market," Caroline said, her voice warm but entirely professional. Bad news travels quickly in this business. After we finally hung up, my phone buzzed with another angry text from Julian. He foolishly claimed I was deliberately and illegally withholding critical company property during an active commercial emergency, warning me that I was creating severe career-ending legal issues for myself. Under the strict, calming advice of my attorney, I took a screenshot of the threat, forwarded it directly to Helen to add to our growing file, and turned off my phone. For the rest of that beautiful Friday afternoon, the absolute quiet in my house was almost overwhelming but peaceful. My son Wyatt and I spent the entire day packing heavy cardboard boxes with his old textbooks and college notes for his upcoming move. Every heavy book we handled felt like a reminder of how quickly the time had passed and how many precious family milestones I had experienced only through a tiny phone screen while sitting in freezing server rooms. Looking at Wyatt, I finally realized that the silence of my phone was not a terrifying problem to be solved. It was a healthy boundary I should have drawn 20 years ago. I did not feel even slightly anxious about the empty inbox. I felt a strange, quiet sense of profound relief, and for the very first time in my adult life, I made dinner for my family without anxiously checking a single server status dashboard. During the tense transition weeks, I helped the exhausted engineering team patiently, calmly answering their frantic questions and explaining the complex system dependencies. But I left the building exactly when my contracted 10 hours were complete, not a minute later. 3 senior developers from Zenith Core Solutions later resigned in disgust and immediately applied to Nexus Data Systems. I hired 2 of them and strongly recommended the third to another elite team I trusted. I had no malicious interest in actively dismantling my old company, but these talented engineers desperately wanted to work in an environment where true technical expertise was genuinely respected and properly compensated. 6 months later, I had fully and successfully transitioned into my powerful new role as Chief Architecture Officer at Nexus Data Systems. The corporate culture there was entirely different, a breath of fresh air. Caroline Pierce never once asked me to pathetically prove my value through sheer exhaustion or impossible hours. If I identified a technical risk, she immediately allocated the necessary resources to fix it. If we collaboratively designed a system, my name proudly remained on the patent applications. Thorn Logic Studio continued to operate as a highly profitable independent entity, successfully licensing the Quantum Sync engine to several other non-competing logistics businesses. Zenith Core Solutions barely survived the disaster, but Julian Vance was forced to step down in disgrace as Chief Executive Officer after a brutal board investigation into his misleading investor disclosures. Winston Cole resigned shortly afterward, his reputation ruined. That beautiful autumn, Wyatt finally moved out to begin his rigorous graduate studies across the country. As I helped him unpack his heavy boxes in his bright new apartment, He remarked that I looked far less tired and much younger than I had in years. I smiled warmly, thinking back to his profound kitchen counter question about the true nature of loyalty. I still believe that professional loyalty matters, but I now clearly understand that it must travel in both directions. Deserved, genuine respect is not earned by foolishly sacrificing your personal life and your family just to desperately prove you are essential to a corporation. Sometimes, being truly essential only teaches the wrong, greedy people exactly how much they can endlessly take from you before you finally find the courage to walk away. One quiet Friday evening at Nexus Data Systems, I finished thoroughly reviewing a highly complex system proposal and looked up at the clock. It was exactly 5:42 in the evening. Most of the talented engineering team was already peacefully packing up their bags, and there was no toxic sense of impending doom or midnight panic in the air. I closed my laptop, grabbed my coat, and headed home to have a peaceful dinner with my family. The software systems would still perfectly compile tomorrow, and the multi-million-dollar company would still stand strong. I had finally learned that while my professional technical skills were valuable, my personal life was irreplaceable.